Yeah, just try to write a bunch of them down, because boy, there's so many and they actually seem, productive, which is really nice.
Yeah. I mean, they have the words like.
That is so cool.
That is so cool.
Water smart. Yeah. They're closing another planning and project design on the 21st. Large scale water recycling. Desalination.
Somehow, I don't think that's right.
I don't think that's gonna apply.
I'm on the map. This week.
Oh, shoot.
So I'm on the I can just get there. I can put on it 2 days ago. So.
Oh, I'm glad you're recovering. Of course.
Just a lot of dinner.
Okay. It is 5:32 and I'll call this work session to order. And rather than do a roll call, could we just have everybody identify themselves around the table and I'll speak up for John Valentine?
Still here.
Shay, you want to introduce yourself?
Shay Coburn.
Then how?
Bill Brunner.
Kathy Schwartz.
This is John Valentine, the town trustee. I'm Paige Smith, the town mayor.
Walter Check. Rick Stelter. Pete McCarthy.
Samara Claire. Thank you. So we are going to dive right into this work session, and I haven't talked to you, Shay, but I am assuming I'm going to turn it over to you.
Yeah, okay, I'm gonna take it over. Just interrupt where necessary. So, thank you guys for being here. I'm Shay Coburn with Urban Rural Continuum, here to talk about short-term rentals and accessory dwelling units. This is our third work session, so I've seen many of you before, maybe some new faces in the room. I will just hop right into it. What we, on the next slide, Sam, this is just kind of a quick overview of what we're doing. So I'll do kind of a quick presentation to just make sure we're all on the same page, set the stage, and then we're gonna kind of do it differently than we've done the last 2 work sessions. We're gonna split it up and talk about ADUs first, and then talk about short-term rentals. It just is kind of a lot to cover, so we thought it might be a little easier to kind of focus on one and then the other. Hopefully we'll spend about half of the time on each topic, and then we'll quickly cover next steps. So on the next slide is a little.
Is there going to be, like, how is the interaction from the public? Can they just ask questions anytime, or?
Good question. So what I was thinking is we're going to do accessory dwelling units. And I'll kind of do the brief overview of what the proposal is, so we're all on the same page, what's changed from the last time. And then we'll open it up for discussion. And my thought, if this works for you guys, is do public input and then your input and discussion. And then when we're ready, we'll move on to short-term rentals and do the same thing. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Does that work for you guys?
Is the public input, is there a chance for interaction between the board and the planning commission, and
we
ask questions?
Yeah, we can. I think if there's questions, what typically like helps the workshop keep moving is to just take all of the public comment. So kind of go through anyone who wants to comment and write down questions. And then when it comes to you guys, feel free to answer questions. If it's like a really direct question that's an easy, yes, no, or see here, we can try to answer that to keep it going.
Okay.
But then we don't get stuck in a conversation with one person and like not allow everybody to have their time. Does that work okay? Okay. Yeah, we can kind of see how it goes too. I think the idea of a work session is like it's a little bit less formal. You guys don't have to like open a public hearing and close it and nobody can talk anymore. So we'll try to keep it a little interactive. Okay, so a little background, which most of you know, our firm, Urban Rural Continuum, was contracted by the town to do a housing needs assessment and housing action plan. That was finished last November and is on the town's website if you guys are interested in looking at it. We're using the remaining project funds to kind of do some implementation. So properly referencing the housing document in the comprehensive plan, and then also working on the short-term rental and ADU regulations. We've had 2 other workshops. This is the 3rd. Hi, Susan. So we are, let's see, this just a bit of clarification. I know the town has a lot of projects going on. This is separate from the comprehensive plan. But the housing plan that we did that's already done will be kind of integrated as an element of the comprehensive plan. And then this is separate from your code update or reorganization project. So you have, as every town does, lots of different things going on, but just to help clarify, that clarifies it all. On the next slide, I just kind of wanted to talk big picture about why you might regulate short-term rentals and allow for accessory dwelling units. I was looking back through some notes and stuff today, and it turns out you guys of a town have been talking about ADUs and short-term rentals for a very long time. I don't know. Sam was earlier saying maybe 2019, maybe it's before that. Mary, you might be familiar, but it's been a while. Okay. So it's been a topic of conversation for a while, and we're kind of getting to the nitty-gritty now, getting into the details and figuring out exactly what to do. These were the top 2 priorities identified in the Housing Action Plan. And that project had participation from 150 community members. That doesn't include people who've participated in these workshops or the comp plan or all your other plans and efforts before the housing document that we did. So a lot of people have participated in this conversation already, which is really great. That's a unique opportunity that you don't get on all of the decisions you have to make and all the things you have to talk about. The overwhelming input from our action plan work was please do something. The community felt very strongly that short-term rentals are causing major housing issues in the community, and that ADUs could really help with those housing issues. And that was kind of a big overarching theme. That's why those 2 items became the top 2 actions in the plan. What we started, or the first workshop we did, I was saying, we're kind of beyond the conversation of should we regulate short-term rentals and should we allow for ADUs, because it was very clear in the plan and through that participation process that absolutely. Now we're at the point of we have to work out the details, and that's hard. It's hard to find the balance between, there are some people, the people who say, no, don't add any regulations, don't change anything. And the people who say, absolutely, let's be strict, let's, go on one extreme. Now you kind of have to find this happy place in the middle that pleases the whole community, or at least the majority of the community. Somebody's not going to be happy. This isn't going to be perfect for everyone, but it's how this works, unfortunately. This really should help housing affordability issues. It should help it from getting worse. It might even improve it, but I know that's been a discussion of, well, do ADUs, will it even help? They're expensive to build. I don't see how that can be affordable. Well, they're proven to help. And remembering that just creating any housing options is good in a community, because then there can be some movement. People can move, maybe they can upgrade a little bit and someone else can move into their place. Just movement and options are really good for a housing market. And then there's no one solution to housing affordability. So we talked about this a lot during our planning process, that there's not a silver bullet, unfortunately. There's no one thing that's going to solve this, but there's just this big toolbox with a bunch of different tools in it. Only some of which can a local government actually use or control. And these are two of those items in the toolbox. They are proven strategies to work. You know, it works differently in every communities or in every community. But if you're interested in, you know, in the benefits, we don't really have time to talk about all those details tonight, but Google it. I mean, there's all sorts of different reports of the benefits or the benefits of regulating short-term rentals. There also are regulation or research about the benefits of short-term rentals. They do help serve a market that is needed in a community. And I think so far what I've heard is this community recognizes that. We're not saying, no, don't have any short-term rentals. We're saying, okay, it's kind of getting to be a lot here. Let's do something about this. Let's address this. Both of these are also code updates, which is something the town can actually do and take care of as a town. You don't have to have major partnerships. You don't have to have major funding. So it's something that the town can actually do to help with the housing issues and start to make a difference. And what's really interesting is, or really helpful, I think, is that the community really feels that these two items are going to start to help make a difference with housing issues in this community. And then on the next slide, we will talk about goals for the work session. So I kind of touched on this already. We want to figure out regulations that will best serve the whole community. Will they be perfect for everybody? Nope. But will they be good for the community as a whole? That's what we're aiming for here. It really is hard to please everybody and to manage all goals and all objectives. But we're kind of walking the line here and trying to figure out what that is. The last couple of work sessions, we've received really good input, really thoughtful input, follow-up input in writing. We obviously agree, that's obvious, but I think keeping some of these big picture goals in mind is really important. I did adjust the proposed regulations based on the input from the last work session and the first one. I think one of the big goals to keep in mind here is the capacity of the town. So you guys are a small town. You only have so many staff people. There's only so many hours in the day. So a lot of what these proposed regulations focus on is trying to keep things simple, keep them so they can actually be understood by your community and enforced by staff, and not just rules that are out there that nobody's actually enforcing or can enforce, but really try to make it reasonable, clear, and effective all at the same time. Let's see, I think as the Board of Trustees and as the Planning Commission, you guys have limited time to discuss these items and make decisions, right? Like that's just how it is. There's already a lot of meetings, a lot of stuff going on. So hopefully focusing these 3 work sessions on this by the end of today, you can have really, you can be a lot more comfortable with where we're going and what we're doing. I think, well, we all do things differently. Sam and I were just talking about this. Some people are ready to make decisions right away. Some people really like to analyze and think through and take the time. And I think that's where we are. It's like, we're going to take the time. We've taken a lot of time, and it's probably time to start figuring it out and like, let's make a decision and move forward. So hopefully we can get there today. We talked a little bit about this before, that regulations can change. So it's actually one of your guys' role as a Board of Trustees or Planning Commission is to bring those items up. How are they working? Ask your staff to do, to bring something back to you guys for review. And then Paige and I talked a little bit about maybe once you guys get to the point where you're ready to set regulations for either ADUs or short-term rentals, that you set a date to revisit it. Have staff put it on their calendar for 3 months, 6 months, a year, whatever you feel is appropriate, and say, can we revisit this? We want to revisit it and see how it's working, because I know there's been some concerns of, well, we don't know if that works. How's that going to work? I don't know about this. This feels a little uncomfortable, but at least maybe you want to do that. Set a time, revisit it, and you can always adjust. So what we're gonna do tonight, we're gonna start talking about accessory dwelling units first. I'll do, like I explained previously, I'll do a quick overview and then we'll have discussion about it. I do feel like there's been more conversation and more discussion needed for the short-term rental conversation. So if we get too far down the line, I might kind of keep us moving so we have ample time for the short-term rental conversation. Does that work okay? Questions from you guys so far? Good, okay. So why would we allow for accessory dwelling units? I tried to put this information together, and sorry, it's a lot of information on one slide, but I tried to organize it based on the recurring themes that we found through the housing. And those are the items in bold: focus on locals, maintain community character, etc. And those were really the kind of important things when thinking about housing. So keep in mind, I'm coming at this from the picture of, or from the viewpoint of affordable housing. So this was the second priority action identified in the plan. It also came up in the comprehensive plan process a lot. I'll talk about that a little bit later, and it was specific to a solution for housing problems that the community is facing. This will really help provide a needed housing type. So what we found in the needs assessment is that your community has a lot of smaller households, but not a lot of small units. So a lot of single family homes, but not smaller units for smaller households. And ADUs, limiting them at 800 square feet, provides a smaller unit for single couples, anything like that. Yeah, seniors, that's a great example. It also allows an extra unit on a property if the person desires to build that unit or convert something into a unit, which can help people afford their own housing. So, you know, maybe a young couple could actually afford to buy a house because they're going to have a rental house in the back, or they'll live in the ADU in the back and rent the main house, but it can help people actually afford to live here, which is really nice. Research actually shows that ADUs typically rent for less because land costs are zero, which is really cool. I was a little bit surprised by that, but the more I thought about it, really does make sense. And then it really incentivizes building long-term rentals. So as we've been talking about regulating short-term rentals, people have mentioned, well, can't we, instead of regulating short-term, can't we incentivize long-term? This is one of those ways to do it, to allow building of ADUs. They're very likely to be long-term rentals. Maintaining the community character. So this is a big one that keeps coming up. ADUs can really help provide extra housing, but they'll do this slowly over time. So not everybody in town can just afford to and has the means and time to just build an ADU all at once. So it's something that kind of happens slowly over time and is a nice way to kind of merge with the community character and not just totally change it overnight. Putting regulations in place for ADUs can help mitigate those neighbor impacts like parking and things like that. It can also allow multi-generations to live together. So there's a lot of examples where you have, grandparents living in the accessory unit, or the grown kid who's not quite able to go totally live on their own and afford their own place, but then they have their own space. So helps that. It could also free up some other units. So if there are families living, in Paonia, maybe they could live on the same property. And then a couple other items of focused on the recurring themes is using the water tap moratorium as an opportunity. So the idea is get these rules in place now and kind of sort things out so that when you guys are ready to lift that moratorium, that you're kind of prepared and ready and you know what this ADU thing might look like. And then leveraging the town's capacity, we talked about having simple regulations, I think is really important. And then also having regulations that focus on what's important to you guys, like community character, health, safety, and those items. A quick update on the House bills that I've been talking about. House Bill 24-1152 did pass. It's awaiting the governor's signature. And that is a requirement. That is a mandate from the state for municipalities to allow accessory dwelling units. The catch is that you guys are not big enough to have to comply with that rule yet. So you guys, that doesn't apply, but an indication of that is where the state is going. This is what the state, really believes is helpful with affordable housing. But might be interesting to read if you're interested in it. And then on the next slide, the proposed regulations. So this is what is proposed that we're talking about today. The definition of an ADU. So it'd be a dwelling unit located on the same lot as the principal dwelling unit, clearly incidental and subordinate to the principal dwelling unit. It could be freestanding, attached, or within the principal dwelling unit. One would be allowed for to every detached single-family home in all zones. 800 square feet maximum floor area. You have to comply with the adopted building codes, setback, height, all of those. You don't, your code has different regulations for accessory structures, but ADUs would not fall into that category where you could be within setbacks. These would have to be within setbacks, just the same as your main house. One off-street parking space required, plus the requirement for your principal unit, designed to complement the principal dwelling unit, could be built before a principal dwelling unit, which can sometimes help people afford to build. And then it would utilize the same water tap and sewer tap as the principal unit, but have a separate water meter and pay separate or pay monthly utility fees as established. And I think that is it. The next slide talks about the summary of changes. So just to help refresh our minds, if we've done a little bit of back and forth throughout these workshops, the changes from the last version, so just the last workshop, I removed the regulation to prohibit ADUs from being licensed and used as a short-term rental. And we'll talk about that a little bit more with the short-term rental regulations, but the idea is that the cap on the short-term rental regulations can cover that. We don't need a separate rule that makes things even more complicated to limit ADUs. If you're putting a cap in town, let that cap rule. It doesn't matter what type of unit it is. Just set the cap where you feel it's appropriate. The other change is that I removed the tap fees in this section. So tap fees are in your chapter 13. And the tap fees would be set per that code. So we're not really talking about that in the short-term rental, or sorry, in the ADU regulations. But the tap fee you would connect to the same tap as the principal dwelling unit, meaning that you would not be paying for a separate tap. This is probably something that I tried to avoid talking about at the first meeting, because I know why you're very sensitive. You guys are in the middle of a large discussion with the water tap moratorium. So I'm hopeful that that is something that, you guys could revisit as part of getting rid of that moratorium when you're ready, that could be revisiting your tap fees and discussing all of that. A couple of notes. I made a few minor clarifications and edits. Before I had noted every single change, I tried to put a little comment bubble where I clarified. It was getting really messy, so I did not include those, but there are changes and clarifications in there. I did maintain the requirement for one parking spot. That was something that came up a time or two. Other legislation that just passed, I think it's passed, might be waiting for the governor's signature, are some state rules about not requiring parking in certain instances, but that's places where you have a train and buses and public transit. You guys don't have that here. People mostly have cars, so it seems appropriate to require that. If you're finding that people are not able to build ADUs and it's all because of this one parking space, maybe that's something you consider removing at a later time. Or someone could get a variance to parking. So they could come to the planning commission and say, hey, I can't do it. And if they meet the criteria in the code, then the planning commission could potentially approve that. Another note that it came up a couple of times, illegally built accessory dwelling units would remain illegal. So just because the town now allows them, it doesn't mean that someone who converted their garage without a building permit into an accessory unit is now legal. They would have the chance now to make that legal. So they could come to the town with plans and say, hey, I'm going to comply with all of your rules and get a permit and make it legal. So you could, but it doesn't just grandfather people who have illegally done that. If that makes sense. And people who have them legally and have been legally operating them they remain the same. They are legal as they are. Okay, so I will stop talking now. That's enough from me. And on the next slide, I'll just pose some questions about what's kind of working and what's not. What concerns do you have? I know we have limited time, so my thought was instead of going around the whole room for public, just ask if anybody has comments to come up and speak. Mayor, does that work okay?
It's fine with me.
Okay, and do we want to
Everybody?
set a time limit on that? I know you guys typically do about 3 minutes.
We don't have a timer to speak of,
Okay,
so,
I can do it on my phone, it's just 3 minutes.
Sure.
Standard
yeah, I mean,
appropriate.
I could do it on my phone, right?
Okay, well, you can listen. That's no problem. Anybody in the public, and then we'll come up
How
here.
do I do it? Because you're gonna be
Okay,
listening more than
okay.
necessarily. I think I can make, I got John's help over here.
So just keep in mind, we have a lot to discuss tonight, but please do comment, maybe keep it succinct, clear, easy to understand. Let us know what's working and what's not working, what you support, what you don't support. And we'll try to focus on ADUs first. We'll go to short-term rentals next. Okay. Yeah, come on up. Do you need name and address for workshops, work session?
No, we're not doing.
Kate Finley, Fox Elder Avenue, here in Paonia, was where I live. And let's see, so, when I first heard about this, then I read the, I sent you guys a thing that I read in the Denver Post editorial on April 21st. That, they said that they were thinking if they had ADUs, that they would, limit the, amount of the whole property that could be developed. So like a developer couldn't come in and just, like maybe have a setback, but have it like total built up. I know you said only 800 square feet, but my house is 627 square feet, my whole house. So that's pretty big to me, but, if you have a small yard, if you have a small yard, you know, it could, like, you could, even with the setbacks, maybe you could fill it in, so in the middle. So, I was thinking, well, and what the Denver Post said that Denver does is they have a percentage of the property that can be developed. So I was just thinking it was something to think about. I don't know what the percentage is that Denver has, but you know, like 50% could be developed. I mean, I don't know. You know? So I just thought that might be a good idea to prevent it from being just totally besides the setbacks all filled in. That's it. Awesome.
Anyone else?
Christina Patterson, Price Road. Parking's just gonna be an issue, and it's hard to move forward without some really good ideas about parking. You go after work on any of these streets on any block, and everyone has 2 cars in front of their house. And that's it. I don't know where the extra 1 or 2 cars is gonna go. And I'm also concerned about the people that bought water taps, you know, before the water moratorium for ADUs. And are they gonna get their money back? I think they're gonna be sort of upset that people then are going to not have to buy a water tap. So it's a consideration because they're pretty pricey. I think they're $6,000 or $7,000, and people did purchase them right before for their ADU. So thanks a lot.
Thank you.
I have a few questions. I think that by and large, you ADU, well, Mary Backman for $511. I think by and large, the redoing of the proposed ordinance is good and the code provisions are very good. I have a question about, so would small manufactured homes be allowed as part of it as long as they meet building requirements? as a tiny home. So a tiny home or a small manufactured home. I do like the fact that there's no tap fee, but that a meter is required, because I think separate metering is really good. I have a question about, when you define parking, is it on-street or off-street parking? You just say there's a parking place, but I think it needs to be further defined as to what's going to be. I think that's it. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks.
Linda McCone, Second Street. I just want to say I appreciate your making the changes. It's really difficult to please everybody. But I feel like you listened to the comments that were made and made an effort to incorporate as many as possible to come up with a compromise that is a way to start. Because the problem is we need to start. There needs to be something that starts happening here. So we don't end up like Aspen. So we end up with places for people to live who work in this town. I think that's essential. Otherwise, we're gonna have to learn how to teach our own children and haul our own trash. So, and serve food in the restaurants. So the other thing I wanna say is I really appreciate that you included the consideration for ADUs to also be short-term rentals. Thank you.
I'm Gia Finelli, and I have the laundromat on Second Street. I'm just concerned a little bit about, I've lived in towns where they have this, and they're very crowded, and you just don't even feel like it's a town anymore. You feel like you're walking through a parking lot. So I'm concerned about that. And I'm also concerned about the look. Mary, you were saying something about the manufactured homes, and that is just not appealing to me as far as like, if I, were to look at a beautiful home and then have a manufactured home in the back. So I'd like to have some regulations on the town kind of coming together on a look that, so we just don't, I don't know, have this hodgepodge of really unattractive homes or small homes. Crammed in. And I like the other gal's idea about keeping some land open, because it also is very just bad to have no space in between a house and another house and another house and the back house and the alley house and this house. So I think we need to be really careful about the planning. So maybe have a committee for that. Thank you.
Hi, Samantha Staley. I'm at 1004 Third. Actually, primarily to comment on short-term rentals, but with the ADUs, from what I'm hearing, and appreciate everybody's time, and sharing comment, and you guys for your time and listening. I'll speak to that more later, but the ADUs, I would think we'd be looking for fairness. And so I really like the concept of capping at a certain square foot. But as far as limiting to a certain percentage of the property, if someone has a small lot and wants to make that income, or for me, it would be hosted by aging parents, so they can age in place with me. I'm fortunate to have a larger lot and they're privileged, but I wouldn't want my next door neighbor. It's a very small lot and could have that same need to make income or host family. So they could age in place, that they would be shut out from that based on this percentage requirement. And it adds a layer of complexity. I would look for being fair, first and foremost. And as far as requiring a certain aesthetic, again, I think that's a very complicated regulation. It starts to sound like making an HOA for all of town. And I know most would reject that. And so anyway, thinking about that, obviously setbacks and all of those things are really help with, we don't want towering condos in every backyard. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sam, do you have but I don't see anybody who wants to speak.
Okay, I guess for anyone online who wants to speak, if you could like raise your hand or speak up, just so we don't miss it. Anyone else in the audience?
Just one, I think I know the answer. It's David Merritt, 55 Pan American. If I want to build an ADU under these proposed regulations, it can't happen until the water moratorium is lifted. Is that right? I mean, even though you don't have to get a water tap, you can use the same tap. It's still not going to happen until the water situation gets resolved.
Did you see any hands or anything online, Sam? Okay. Let's hop up here. I don't know if you guys feel like going in a circle or just talking as you wish.
Are we gonna be timed to 3 minutes?
That's
'Cause I'll-
so little.
Yeah,
Paige.
I know, because I'm not sure we all should have to. Just because.
Let's, yeah, we'll just try to overall keep it, we have until 7:30.
We'll see how it
So,
goes.
yeah, we'll try to give it like, 20, 30 minutes here.
I would just like to propose one thing. When we're done talking, we have at least a brief period of rebuttal from the community. Where they can get up if there's any questions that they'd like to say something. So.
And do
If
you,
that timing, if we're okay, if we don't cut SDRs too short.
we might.
Play it by ear.
Just like, maybe we can just try to keep our thing, but also just have just a brief.
And at the end of the day, you guys are the decision makers. So I think from my perspective, and you guys get to decide as the board and the planning commission, I think you guys need to have the time to really deliberate and get your questions answered and try to feel comfortable. Because you guys do have to be in the position of making the hard decision and deciding. What was I gonna mention? Do you want me to clarify a couple of the questions that were asked before we move on? Is that helpful? Okay, so we did add in a minimum, we clarified. There is a current minimum landscape open space % of lot that is required in the municipal code. And there has not been a requirement in the R1 district, but there has been a requirement in R2, R3, and other districts. So what I'm proposing here is that that term was funky and defined for subdivisions and it didn't apply. So I changed the term to minimum landscape area and added 25% to the R1 district. So you would have your setbacks and you would have a minimum open space. So if for some reason your setbacks, weren't enough, this minimum landscaped open space would require or keep some open. So hopefully that addresses some of the lot coverage kind of concerns. I think we talked about that at the first meeting. And then
Can you tell us what pages you're on when you make
This is on page 18.
Okay, thank you.
yeah, thank you. And then the small manufactured homes, this won't be on a specific page because this relates to your building code. So if your building code already allows for manufactured homes that are approved by the state of Colorado, then, or HUD, which you have to allow in some of your districts, then it doesn't matter that it's an ADU or that it's a primary unit. If it's a manufactured house that's certified and your building code already allows for that, that would apply to accessory dwelling units as well. And I'm sorry, I haven't looked that up, but I feel like I can look because it's in the assessment somewhere.
Seems like I was reading that earlier, which actually, in the packet, and it's a big, I think it has to be a certain size for manufactured. And it's kind of big.
1,200
big.
square feet.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a big house, so.
States adopted now tiny home rules, which are different from tiny houses. Try to keep that straight. Yeah.
I seem to recall in the housing plan, there was some statement about maintaining the character of the neighborhood, so it couldn't be like
Totally different.
like a camper trailer or something. It had to be,
Excluded by our statutes
but
now.
I mean, it had to be somewhat similar to the
Yeah.
character of the.
Yep, exactly. So there is a provision in there now that it has to be generally compatible with, I can look up the words, but you're right. Yeah, generally compatible. So the manufactured home or prefab, like not built on site, is regulated by your building code. And then the parking is off-street. That is specific. Sorry, I didn't mention that. And think, I think that was all the direct questions.
Could you elaborate? You're saying that a parking space does not, it can be an off-street parking space.
It's required to be an off-street
Great,
parking
thank
space,
you.
so it needs to be within the property, not.
No,
not
okay, so
off
we
of
were,
the street,
we are
meaning
covering,
on site.
we are covering the lot with a parking space.
Right,
Okay, which I think probably deserves some more discussion.
sure, and
Thanks.
it
Thanks
can
for
be all
clarifying
different, because sometimes you can build, an accessory unit over a garage, so you're not actually covering any more space. Or a parking space, I believe here can be gravel. So some communities count lot coverage differently. It's only hard surface, or it's only buildings with eaves, or, depends how you define that. So I think that's all the direct questions.
Are you,
Yes.
okay, Pete, did you have a comment? You kind of came out of the gate. I wonder if you want
I've got lots of comments.
to say.
Okay, a few things. I heard a lot of people, parking has obviously been a big issue. I first want to say that I really agree with what Sam said about, having a large lot versus having a small lot. I understand we want the town to look a certain way, but we are not Santa Fe, we are not Santa Barbara. If you've looked around town, it's a ramshackle mining town. Like, it's not I think the look we need to be going for is we take care of our community members. And if that means I have neighbors that are living in trailers, I'm not going to report them. That's their housing for their family. We need to address the issue. And if the issue is we have a few more houses on the lots, but that puts roofs over people's heads, it makes sure that they can be with their elderly grandparents, it makes sure that our stores that needs to be the priority. So I think that we can address the issue about the homes. Someone's not going to they live there. If we prioritize the ADUs for owner occupied homes, not some investor, an investor is just going to want to cram that property full of an ADU. Sam's going to want to build a beautiful little cottage in the back for her mom. There's a very big difference. So we don't have to regulate and become an HOA if we just align our values with helping everyone. But I agree with the equity. We should not, if you have a smaller yard versus a larger yard, we should not regulate that. With the parking, I think it's a big mistake if we're doing off-street parking. And I'll tell you why. We are now suffering under the whole short-term rental. Nobody had even imagined this existed 15 years ago. It didn't exist 15 years ago. Driving and transportation is not going to be the same in 15 years as it is today. Okay, there is a vast difference of how people are going to get around in 15 years than how they get around today. The way cars operate is going to be very different in 15 years. We are stuck in the past. We are plowing our beautiful yards and our trees and creating parking spaces. I got here on a bicycle. I've lived for 20 years on just a bicycle. I take my bicycle to the park when all people are crammed and there's parking there. There's an incentive to move to micromobility if parking is hard. And there are e-bikes. These are things that didn't really exist 10 years ago. The state's giving out rebates. We can move our citizens. We don't need to be regulated. We don't need to be told that we have to build parking spaces. We should use our land for people. So you can build an ADU on the size of a parking space. And my other point is in terms of manufactured homes. Manufactured homes are the best homes on the planet. In the United States, and maybe the manufactured homes we have around here, those are not so nice. But what's coming are prefab, beautiful manufactured homes at lower costs. And we also have a budding builder. We have tons of builders. We have tons of natural builders here. We should promote for them to be building, but we don't have to try to create what they have to build. Because then you're gonna limit their creativity, you're gonna limit people's ability to go out and look at innovative new forms of housing.
Well, now I know that my.
I just think that what we really need to do is prioritize the owners of homes, not the owners of properties here. So any of these regulations that we have, let's encourage ADUs, but not if you own the home, but you own the property and live somewhere else. If you are living there, we want to encourage owner occupancy in town. That's what's going to keep our culture and keep us from having to then try to regulate everything. That's all I'm saying.
Next.
I want to underscore the manufactured home comment. It meant something a lot different in the past. There are several communities, I wish I could remember, I don't have that information with me. But there are several big projects, I think in San Luis Valley and near, you know what I'm talking about? Yeah, they've been in the press a lot. They're beautiful and way, way more attractive than those townhomes I'm used to seeing, you know, for the last couple of decades. So, that, I agree, that's a very useful prospect to be able to bring in.
What they used to call a trailer house or.
Yeah, that's the old school. So anyway, good comment.
I also, I'm sorry.
Go ahead. I was sorry. Go ahead, and then it's Rick's turn.
Okay, sorry. I'm also in favor of not requiring parking. Just, and this is gonna be across the board, but especially for this. Yeah, as a person who's also into micromobility and biking and walking, and this is a very walkable community. And I think that setbacks are totally appropriate. And I'm not sure if I'm in favor of the percentage of the property that can be developed. That still feels a little bit like we're really, really getting quite exclusive in what we're allowing. But I think with proper setbacks, I think we can accomplish what we want to accomplish. And thank you for your comments, Pete.
Thanks.
I definitely support on that.
I've got several thoughts on parking. As we are right now, there are streets in this town where you can't drive the ambulance down and have traffic pass because they're solidly parked both sides of the street at night. And as one of the EMS members, I really am concerned that we will have some point where we're not going to be able to get to a house. And many times we can't get to the house because cars are parked and I need 4 feet to get the cop to come through and they're parked up tight. So I have to go a long way around to get somebody out into my ambulance. Parking is critical now. 15 years from now, we can change the regulations and we should if conditions change. But what I see now is parking is critical, and both for STRs and ADUs, we need parking and it needs to be off street. I happen to know that when you have 2 people in the house here, and that's what the ADUs are designed for, we have 2 cars. That's just what it is. Because nobody here can work in this town or out of town without having a car. And you need a car to go to the grocery store. You need a car to go get underwear. You know, this is the way our system is set up now. So parking is critical. I think that 1 parking space off street is probably not enough. We have many houses that they have converted their garages into living space now, whether they're living in it or they're renting it out, doesn't matter. But I can think of 3 right on 3rd Street that are that way. They took the garage and turned it into living space. So then there is no off-street parking. Now there are 2 cars or 3 cars in many cases on the street. So parking is one thing. Also, tap fees. I'm in favor of discounted tap fees for ADU. We need the tap fees to develop and maintain our system. Our system is run basically with that money. We take the tap fee, we leverage that money. As little as it is, we leverage it for loans and hopefully loan forgiveness. We get grants, but we have to have that money up front in order to do it. I also am in favor of restricting water using appliances, like in an ADU, no washing machine. You know, this is just one thing. I'm not in favor of taking the dishwasher out because it uses less water. I also think that we need to make sure that we use the most efficient appliances we can. We mandate 1.6 gallon per flush toilets, or dual flush toilets, better yet. They're not more expensive, but they save water, they save a lot. Also, having an STR be an ADU, we're running into another problem. We have parking problems already. And I don't know how we're going to solve the ADU parking problem. Maybe we have to have parking permits in town, free for residents, and for visitors, they'll have to pay. That's probably the only way we can make this work because we have such limited parking. On 3rd Street on Sunday, 3rd Street is completely lined from Grand Avenue all the way to Rio Grande with parking for churches. And, you know, that's part of our lifestyle here. That's the way it is.
If I might, I'm gonna stop you.
Okay.
And the reason is it's 6:21. I hope, and I want to make sure other trustees and commissioners have a chance to speak before we decide. Because we're hoping to stop at 7:30, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so we really do want to leave that other hour. So who else up here would like to speak? I would like it to be someone who didn't speak already.
No, that's not what it's about.
Oh, okay.
I'd like to hear the rest of his comments.
Well,
How much, do you have another minute worth?
Hang on.
Stuff to say?
you
do it right there.
Impose a limit on
no,
other people.
I know, but it's been longer. I've been timing, and you've been longer than the other folks, and I want to make sure everybody else has a chance.
That's fine.
So,
Okay.
because we are coming up on time and I don't want to cut the SDR short. Does anybody else up here want to say anything? Yes, go ahead, Lynn.
Developable lot area, page 10. There is a. It says tractor parcel is located in an area with a high flood hazard. I think that there should be a statement there unless a Delta County floodplain development permit is obtained and approved, because otherwise they've changed the floodplain maps. And so it's really impacted a lot more properties the way it is. And you can still, according to Delta County, you can get a permit, approved permit. So I think that should be added, and that's in that first item.
Tell me where you are.
Page 10.
And I'm sorry, there's multiple page numbers because of the way the packet is it page
Oh.
10 of like the red line or the blue line regulations?
It was
Or page
the
10,
packet
because
we
we have a
had.
box, page 10
Yeah,
at the top right hand corner.
it's a little blue box. So there's a building height on that page.
Yeah, it's on page 10, Lynn. It's the gray box on the top right-hand corner of the
But the
page.
packet or the,
It's on the
Maybe
packet.
also
recommend-
It's
I can see it.
it's the blue striking out our ordinances. It's the zoning code.
Page 10 or page
Definitions.
6.
Page 10 or 6, thank you.
Yeah, on the bottom at 6 of 34, it's the definitions.
and which definition, Lynn?
Developable lot area.
Oh, it's the very first definition.
Yeah,
under
the
there.
very first one, and it's basically saying if you're in a high flood hazard, that you basically can't put anything there, and that's really not true. You can, if you have a development permit obtained and approved through Delta County. So I think that needs to be added. And then I have one more. section 161160 requirements for accessory building and uses.
You say what page? You know? 1660. Say, could you say what the citation was again?
161160. It's way down.
Page 32 on the top.
Thank you.
28 of 34. That's what we think down low.
On there, it says, all detached accessory buildings shall be located in the rear one half of the lot. There are a number of non-conforming lots that wouldn't work for. They're quite large lots. And to put them in the back it's not even possible. So I think,
And are you referring to ADUs specifically or all buildings?
well, it's in the ADU, it's under the ADU section.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but the accessory buildings do not apply to the accessory building requirements are not applying to the ADUs.
Oh,
They have been
okay.
separated,
They're separate.
right? Shane?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, it's a little confusing, but there are rules for general accessory buildings. So like think garages, storage sheds, pergolas, things like that. And then I've pulled ADUs out of that so that it has kind of separate
So it
rules.
doesn't say where it needs to be located.
Correct, just within your building envelope. So your setbacks still apply for your ADU, but it could be in the front, it could be in the back. Yeah, thank you. Good clarification.
Anyone else, Bill?
Yeah, first, could you speak a little bit about the relationship between ADUs and boarding, a boarding situation where people are sharing a house or someone is a boarder in their basement? Is there a tension there? Or does this codify that situation in all cases?
I guess let me know what you think, what you're referring to as border. It's a little bit like, I think your code might define it. And a boarding or rooming house is typically where, let's see, it's a building other than a hotel, cafe, or restaurant where for compensation, lodging and or meals are provided for 3 or more boarders or roomers exclusive of the occupant's family. In such facilities, length of stay is normally 30 days. Is that what you're talking about? Or are you talking about
That kind of thing, I would expand it to even if it was only 1 or 2 persons boarding in that situation. How does this relate to the ADUs?
So maybe you're talking about a long-term renter, like if I
Yes.
own a house and I want to rent my extra room to someone.
Yeah, is there a tension? Conflict
There's
here?
not. What we did was there was a provision in the existing code that puts restrictions on long-term rentals of rooms, and we've got rid of that. It seems unnecessary to regulate the long-term rental of a room in a house, and that's really hard to enforce. So that is gone, and then an ADU could be used as proposed today. The ADU could be used as a short-term rental. It could be used for your parents. It could be used for your own
Okay.
visitors.
That kind of answers my question. And my concern is just that running a boarding house and living in a boarding house are both traditional and rural communities like Paonia and the most affordable source of affordable housing. And I just want to be sure that we're not limiting that in any way. I think that the attempt to make things fit a neighborhood, I call it taste police. I don't think that's appropriate in Paonia. I think I would like to see some attempt to differentiate between a out and out commercial corporate ownership or non-resident ownership. I think that there should be a requirement that the primary residence be occupied by the owner of the property and they be a natural person. I agree with Rick that I think that the tap fee is only fair and the water ordinance needs to be fixed quickly, I think. The biggest concern I have with doing this now before we fix the water, there's a couple of things. One, I think that I don't understand the basis to assume that the water moratorium is just going to go away. I mean, I think after the studies are done, we're gonna be in one of three situations. We're not gonna have enough water, we're gonna have just enough water, or we're gonna have some extra water. And I think we need to tackle that now. And what I'm afraid of is that if this short-term rental thing is passed before we deal with this, there's going to be a perception that there's a green light on ADUs. And people are sneaking this now, and it's gonna increase. And we do a very horrible job of enforcement. And so I think that this is great to be working on this. I think that the Planning Commission should start some deliberations on this in our own meetings. And I think that we should revisit this from time to time, but not put it into an ordinance until it's actually meaningful. Because we know that we have the water to do it. So that's my comments.
Okay, I just want to thank everybody. You get 3 minutes.
Oh, excuse me?
We need to get going, so I really want to make
It's
sure.
gonna be, it might be a little bit longer, I'm sorry. So I agree with Rick on the water and bill. I do want to say, I mean, I don't want to drill down on appearances right now because, I mean, it sounds like we've got some more fundamental things that we have to do, but I am concerned about appearances. I don't think it's regulated through the building code though, because that's aesthetics, and you cannot enforce aesthetics under a building code. It would have to be under land use. And, you know, we could solve that by offering pre-approved plans too, you know, that the community has agreed on, we like the looks of, we think they fit everywhere. So the parking is a big issue. You know, if people are changing their garages into ADUs, that was the parking for the primary residence. So I mean, where are you gonna have parking? What I'm looking at are lots becoming paved over or just cut down, being used for cars and houses, and we're gonna lose trees. We're gonna have a net increase in the heat here with our microclimate. We're gonna destroy it by having all these people here. I do think very clear rules have to be put into place and not making it a free-for-all. I mean, maybe it will be a free-for-all because people can't afford it. But it's risky to have such an open ordinance that any can do anything with. I see these changes in our land regulations here as problematic. I am seeing the same thing that happened when Ken Knight was here and they moved sections out of the land use code. There are things that are contradictory now. Just chopping things out because they don't fit with the ADU plan is a mistake. We do need to restore the maximum lot coverage. It was in our code. You don't realize it, but it was a part of our code, and we're looking at a mistake now when it talks about minimum lot coverage. You don't want to start chopping out things about the accessory uses and buildings and uses because there are other accessory uses and buildings other than ADUs, but you're so razor focused on ADUs that we're going to be destroying our code a little bit more here, and I don't want to see that happen. Okay, and the setbacks are important. I do agree with our commenters. I've mentioned it before. It doesn't seem to have registered. Also, height restrictions. You know, you could ruin someone's small lot next to you. I do think we need special reviews. And where there are a lot of really ugly flat top buildings that with a slight pitch that have gone up around town, and they can ruin a neighbor's property. I don't want to see that happening. Thank you.
So it is 6:33, and I would like us to move on to short-term rentals, as long as everybody up here is spoken. And please, because rather than take the comment in, I just feel like we're going to run out of time.
Can I just ask, what are our comments worth? Because I know I've commented as a citizen on some of these issues. I've drawn pictures. They haven't been recognized. And I've commented as a board member and they've been ignored. And I know you can't make people happy, but I do represent a contingent of this population too. And hopefully we can look at this at a board, you know, with maybe a little bit. I know Shay has a time limit, obviously, you know, with this body of work that she's been laboring on. But
I do think this is gonna take some deliberation, first with the planning commission and then the board of trustees. I absolutely agree. To me, this is not ready for prime time, honestly. With the varying input people are getting, we really need to think a little bit more about what our town looks like and the kind of lots we have in town, from my perspective. We can't do a one size fits all.
I would just like to say, I'd like there to be like an understanding that we are in a crisis and that there are people
Yes.
being affected by this all the time. And a lot of the things that we're mentioning about the future, we can make changes that would bring this about and then look to see what happens during the year. It's not like all of a sudden there's going to be 1,000 ADUs. So it's like we can adjust as we go.
Right.
That isn't an excuse to just stop and not do anything, which is what well, that's what we've done for the last 5 years. We've done nothing.
Pete,
So-
this is the process where this is a draft that's gonna have to go through a very formal process where people and our attorney will look at it. Because, so again, we're not gonna please everybody, but there will be more consideration because we have a lot of people with a lot of different concerns. So this is just called a workshop and there'll have to be more input. It's from my concern, when we do ordinance, it's never perfect. It takes a while to get through it and we may not get these things in place right away. And that's why I wanted to talk about STRs, because there is a lot more we can do with STRs right now than ADUs. So let's please switch gears. And Shay, if you would start on your STR discussion.
But do you mind if I clarify a couple items before?
If you're quick.
Yeah, so right now, as proposed, the square foot maximum is 800 square feet, no matter what. There's not a percentage of the main house. And I think a couple people hit on it. It's for fairness and ease. What if you have a tiny house, you build your ADU, you expand your main house, the numbers keep changing. That's too complicated. Keep it simple. We did have an owner occupancy requirement in the first draft. You may or may not remember that. We said the owner has to occupy either the ADU or the primary unit. That was removed. That was the general consensus was, I don't think that's necessary. You could put that back in, no problem. But the thing is Suzanne, maybe this helps with your comments. I get comments that don't agree. So what I actually do is try to tally things up and figure out the most, okay, I had 3 people say this, but only 1 person say no to that. So I'm going to go with that. So I understand, and it's hard because it's impossible to go through and address everything. Energy efficiency stuff, that's a building code issue. So I'm sorry, I'm not going to be able to really address that. But it's something that I encourage you guys to think of and do through your energy codes. Aesthetics aren't regulated in building codes. Sorry if I said that, I didn't mean to say that. That is a land use issue. For parking on the ADU, if someone was to convert their garage into an ADU, they would still be required the parking that is required in the code. So if their 2 parking spaces per their main house are in their garage and they convert their garage to a unit, they need to put those 2 parking places somewhere else. If they build on top of their garage, parking spaces remain, they will be there. So hopefully that clarifies. And the accessory use regulations were put back in. So I'm not totally sure what you're referring to, but they were supposed to be deleted the first time.
There was a
And they're
footnote
back in.
Yeah.
There's one that refers to something that doesn't exist. So that was more of a code cleanup item, but you guys can definitely leave that in if you want to have that in there. Luckily, this is your community. You guys get to decide, and I'll be at home. So let's talk a little bit about short-term rentals. On the next slide, Sam. Okay, so why regulate short-term rentals? I think this is something that came up over and over again during our housing work. I mean, almost where I felt like the community thought that if you regulate short-term rentals, you're going to solve all your housing issues. That's not the case. It's not going to solve all the issues, but it really will make a difference. And then we also have short-term rental owners in the community who feel like, hey, this is what I do. Don't regulate me. There's no need to add any more things. So we're trying to bridge this gap here and find something that works. Regulating short-term rentals was the top priority identified. Mentioned a ton during the comp plan efforts. most units used as short-term rentals are taking a unit for a full-time, that a full-time resident could live in. I understand some people who rent rooms in their house or even rent an ADU or an extra unit may not choose to use it that way as a long-term rental, but often they are. When you disincentivize short-term rentals, you do incentivize long-term rentals. And then also reducing outside investors. We heard this a lot, and we've already heard it tonight with ADUs. We don't want outside people buying up our property, making money off of it for their own business and profit. That's not cool. And adding short-term rental regulations can really help with that. There's a lot of details in here, and I want to save time for you guys to discuss. Like Paige, you and I talked about why, well, actually, that was a different topic. Sorry. The kind of overall effectiveness of short-term rental regulations on affordable housing. I guess I'll just say, search online if you're curious. They do work. This is a widely adopted practice to help with housing affordability. So for anyone who's questioning that this is going to help, you've hired me to try to be your, expert in this and offer you information. It helps. I can't give you a number. I can't tell you absolutely this is what it's going to do, but it helps. I can tell you when I worked in Ridgeway and we put short-term rental regulations, actually refined them when I was there. They were already in place when I got a phone call from someone from outside of town saying, hey, I'm looking at this property and blah, blah, blah. Can you tell me all this information? Spend an hour on the phone with them, telling them everything. And then they'd get to, oh, and can I rent it short-term? And I'd say, oh, we have X amount of licenses and only 5 are available. And they're like, oh, okay. Do I have to own the property to get the license? Yes, you do. Okay. And deal is done. People, who were out of town were done investing. They weren't interested anymore. So that's all I'll say there. I have lots of reasons to explain, but I'll save the time. The way to incentivize long-term rentals is with money. So we've talked a little bit about that and people have brought up, hey, let's incentivize long-term instead of regulating short-term. Almost every example that exists on incentivizing long-term is paying the person the difference between what they're making on short-term to do long-term. You guys don't, I think, want to do that. You have other priorities, other needs. So I don't think that's what you want to do. There are communities that get free ski passes to the hill if they rent to a ski employee or pay the difference. It's really hard to do and really expensive to do. So rather than saying you're specifically incentivizing long-term rentals, you're disincentivizing short-term rentals. Let's see, they're also often really used as a business. Sometimes it's local residents just doing it every once in a while for a little extra income, but often it's business use. And, we as a community regulate business use everywhere in Colorado. So this is not like that crazy or wild. Maintaining community character. So the way I was approaching this, because it was a housing project, is that this really helps with housing. I think a huge consideration for short-term rentals is community character. We heard a lot of discussion of, there's 5 on my block and I'm starting to feel like I live in a hotel or a resort community. I don't have neighbors. I can't walk and ask for a cup of sugar because it's a new random person every time. They park here, the trash goes in front of my driveway, whatever. So it's a lot about this character and feel of your community that you're trying to protect through having short-term rental regulations. There's a lot of pressure on your housing because you have this TAP moratorium. So with the increased pressure with the TAP moratorium, that's only worsening the housing situation. So putting some restrictions on short-term rentals can help relieve that a little bit. And then again, really thinking about the town's capacity. So trying to keep the rules simple. You can get really complicated. So if you'll look at larger cities examples, you'll see that they have tiers and different definitions and different types of rentals and different types of licenses. It is wildly complicated. You guys have other major priorities that you need to deal with, like a water tap moratorium, if that hasn't already been said tonight, and other issues that you want to deal with. So trying to keep them really simple so that they're easy to enforce, community can understand them, and they're just not too overly complicated. And let's see, it's also just helpful to track them, make sure that your visitors are in a safe place or a healthy place. And then there's also the issue that your current regulations technically, I would say, prohibit short-term rentals. You have a definition of a dwelling unit that says it must be rented for 30 days or more. So that needs to be clarified no matter what. And that might make this a little more urgent if you're actually wanting to, try to enforce what you have or clarify or clean up a little bit. Okay, on the next slide, the proposed regulations. So the big picture approach here is to stop the bleeding. And I say that as in, there's a lot of short-term rentals, and it feels, I think, to the community like those are growing. There's more and more properties getting bought up, potentially by out-of-town people, or just more short-term rentals happening. And the community is feeling that. The community is saying, hey, that's affecting my quality of life, my feel of the community, our housing prices. When, a house goes up for sale and an out-of-town person buys it for their own business investment, that's one less house that a local can afford. So the idea is stop the bleeding. Let the existing short-term rentals that already happen continue with a little bit of process. They need a license. We need to track them. We need to kind of get a handle on this, get a grip on it, not just let it happen. And kind of stop it from growing. So set this cap somewhere where it exists today. Stop the creation of more, stop the outside investment into the community, but let what is happening happen. Let there be an option for visitors to rent a whole house, because that's really nice for people. People who have a small house might want to have their family come visit, and they can't have a family of 4 come and stay at their house. They need another house. So that's the big picture approach here. The details are that the short-term rental would be a rental of all or a portion of a dwelling unit for 30 days or less. That's not a hotel, motel, lodging facility, boarding room, house, or bed and breakfast. All short-term rental listings would need a license. The cap on the licenses would be 30 total. The license would be issued to the owner. It's non-transferable. So if someone wants to sell their property, they can't say, oh, it's a short-term rental opportunity, I'll sell you a license with it. That doesn't happen. If the house gets purchased, if there's a license available, they can apply for that license. And it would be valid for 1 year with an option to renew every single year if the person doing it wanted to do that. You would allow short-term rentals in all zones and all dwelling units except deed restricted housing. The parking would be what's required today, no changes on that. The short-term rental must be in a dwelling unit or within a dwelling unit. So again, you can't short-term rent your shed or your garage or a tent in the back. Yeah, it would actually be a proper dwelling unit. Part of that is safety. And then there's some other safety issues in here about having smoke, carbon monoxide detectors, fire extinguishers, adequate trash, clearly posted address so your EMS can actually find you. And the person from out of town who's coming and is calling 911 is running around, and they can actually run outside their door and see a number posted on it and get the EMS there. And then the owner or an agent that owner hires would reside or conduct business within 15 miles of that short-term rental. That's a really helpful thing with enforcement. So like there's a giant party going on, or a raccoon got into the trash and there's trash all over the block. That is someone who could actually take care of issues that are for your kind of community character and feel, that take care of those quickly and address those. So again, the idea is to really kind of stop the bleeding, stop losing houses to more business use, provide housing for locals, and try to really maintain your community character. The next slide, Sam, this is just the summary of changes from the last work session. So from the second draft, clarified some of the licensing language. This is just to really try to make it clear that the property owner would be the licensee. The renewal applications submitted by a particular deadline would be considered before new applications. So it's not like every single year you may or may not get to do your short-term rental. If you have your license and you get it in by the date, and you still qualify, you haven't removed all your safety equipment or something, that you can still get that license. And then a cross-reference to code violation. So any violation of the code follows the standard code violation process. The cap on the total licenses went back to 30. So if you'll remember the first meeting, we proposed 30. There were probably about, 2/3 of the people in the audience who said, make that smaller. We do not need that many. So we reduced it to 20. The second meeting had mostly short-term rental owners in it, and the cap went back up. So, we're kind of going back and forth, but 30 is about where the number that exists today. So that's the idea, is that you're capping it at about where it exists. I also expanded the purpose a little bit to try to help explain the regulations a little bit better. So also made some minor edits, clarifications. I kept in the portion that it would apply to the rental of a room. There's some mixed feelings about that, and I don't know that it's perfectly split. I could go back to my notes. The general idea there is that it is really tricky to regulate one room differently. It's a really easy workaround. So an example, what happened in Ridgeway when I was there is they decided to not count single room rentals towards the cap. They said, those are different. That's like couch surfing. Let's not count those. Well, it turned out that a lot of people could figure out how to make the space that they wanted to rent not be a full dwelling unit. So then it classified as a room, and they had probably 10 more short-term rentals than they wanted because of this kind of workaround in the code, this creative interpretation of, oh, well, it's not a full dwelling unit, but like it was, or they'd roll the stove out of the room while it was getting inspected and roll it back in. So again, in order to keep things simple and kind of fair and easy to enforce, just count them. And if you need to make the cap a little bit higher to allow for those, you can do that if you need to. There's some other benefits of that is, maybe you would encourage someone to actually take on a long-term rental, or maybe you would encourage someone to downsize into a house. You have a lot of single people or couples living in larger houses in Paonia, and maybe this would encourage a little bit of movement. That again, kind of just let the cap take care of this. This is the big picture. Set a number, kind of stop the issue from getting worse. I did not change the licenses per person. I actually think that would affect your locals more than anything. What it looked like was the only people who have multiple listings are people who live here and rent rooms. So that just that seems like it would hurt your locals more than it would hurt out of town investors. And again, we're trying to help the locals and maintain your community's character. The limiting to locals is really complicated. I've tried to do a lot more research on it, and it looks like you can limit some rentals to locals. So you could create a tiered system and then allow for some rentals to only be locals, but you'd still have to allow for out of town or, absentee people to rent. I just don't think it's worth it. I think you guys have a lot going on. You have a lot of other stuff to enforce. Is it, if you're setting a cap, do you need to also require the owner to be a local? I don't know that that's necessary. You're kind of saying, pause where it is today. This is where we're keeping it. Didn't address taxing short-term rentals. Quick update on that. There's a Senate bill and a House bill about taxing short-term rentals. They both failed. So those will not be taxed differently per state regulations. That might come back again. We see that with state legislation, that it comes back the next year in a different way. But I also think taxing is something you guys could address later once you actually get some regulations in place. And then keeping in mind that administration and enforcement is done by staff. So we've heard a lot of well, how are these licenses going to be issued? Is there going to be lottery? How's this going to work? When are things due? That's your staff decision. So you guys, as you know, a board and planning commission, put the rules in place. Staff figures out how to make them happen. So, you know, I think the idea, they've been listening, obviously, on, you know, trying to be fair and keep it equal. I think it also makes their job a lot easier if we're setting the cap somewhere around what exists today. We don't have to worry so much about like who gets the first licenses and what happens and all those complicated details. Okay, a couple more items on short-term rentals on the next slide. These topics keep coming up, so I'm just throwing them in here to be part of the conversation. The effective date. I would propose that you guys would make or require the short-term rentals to get a license no later than the first of the next year. The idea here is this gives you a little time to get an ordinance together, get it passed, get it in place, do some licensing work, and then have everybody required to be licensed. You guys can obviously, you know, pick whatever you want there, but this would allow some flexibility. We also have a concern from existing short-term rental owners that, you know, they're booked for like through the fall or something. And this could be really complicated if they have to cancel stuff. So this would give some heads up. And then fees. So fees are set by the board by resolution. So, you know, we could get some input on this tonight. I am throwing out $500 per license. The idea is this needs to cover your administrative costs to issue and have this whole process to do licenses, accept those licenses, review those licenses, work on any issues that might need to be addressed, address any concerns, actually issue the license, deal with code enforcement. So any calls, complaints, issues that come up, code violations, things like that. So that's a lot of hours. I think what I calculated at the minimum is it would be 8 hours, you know, a license if everything is perfectly smooth and done exactly well and there's zero complaints. And it could be unlimited if you have, you know, squeaky neighbors or just problematic tenants. Okay, so on the next slide, I will stop talking and we will start chatting about what is working and what concerns do you have. And I think just to mention, we did get 2 written comments before this meeting. And one of them was from Ben Graves. Are you here? No. There was generally concerns about having short-term rentals, and generally I would say support to regulate them, to protect from outside investment, to protect community character, and try to have a fair taxing structure. And then Karen Bogg here, so that was another written comment we got, and you guys should have gotten these. She shared Inglewood's ordinance on the Front Range and shared that she thought that was a good example of how they restrict short-term rentals.
In California, wasn't it?
Yes.
It's in California.
Oh. Not Front Range. It was, but it was Inglewood with an I, which is Colorado. It is California. Well, there you go. Okay, well, that's yeah. So those were the 2 public comments that I received in writing before this. Now let's boogie with some public comment. Are you good with that, Mayor?
I'm sorry.
Public comment?
Yes,
Beginning?
I got my 3 minutes.
Okay.
Whenever you're ready. She'll call you.
Second Street. So I just want to say that I've heard that there's way more than 30 STRs in town, that there's closer to 45 or 50. That's in town. Secondly, here's a suggestion. Require an inspection before a license is issued. And your fee should cover this, but the short-term rental should be functional. And I have to say, I have a personal experience of somebody came into town, rented in a short-term rental, the air conditioning didn't work and the toilet didn't flush. Now, those things should be taken care of. That's part of what would, I think, be a part of the inspection. And then lastly, I just want to say I had an article, and it may have come from you. I can't remember where it came from, but it was research from Harvard Law and also from USC Law, showing that short-term rentals remove available housing from a community, and they also cause an increase in long-term rental rates. Thank you.
Neely, 202 Clark. Just real quick, I'd like you guys to rethink or revisit the idea of only having, of including a single room as an STR. And I'll just tell you why. Is because, you know, the only way we can think of, my daughter, proud Paonia Eagle that she is, wants to move back to Paonia. And the only way we can figure out to afford that is to hopefully, when water is available, do an ADU so she and her partner can move into our house. We would like to be able to rent one room in our house. It'll never be a long-term rental, ever. It's part of our house. But that is one way that we could possibly subsidize the possibility of building ADU. So that is one thing that I would like you guys to look at. I get it. People will always try to cheat, will always try to bend the rules, but hopefully if we have some decent enforcement that we can do that. So that's one thing that I would just put out there. The other thing real quick, not related to this. So I'll tell you guys, because I have your undivided attention. I work for an organization called Hilltop. We have funding available to help people that are being evicted, that need first and last month's rent and deposit. So we have some housing help for people, because I know as our housing gets more expensive, our employment, our salaries do not keep up with that. So I'll give the card to Sam real quick, but that's just so I'm here, I want to do that, but that's my pitch.
Gary Backer, 501 Box Elders. I want to absolutely agree with Linda McComb on inspection prior to licensure. And that it needs somebody who's competent doing that inspection. And next, I have questions about enforcing the one room thing. It seems like it's relatively easy to know, here's a house, here's an accessory building unit, whatever that's being rented. But somebody who just has a room, it seems like it'd be really hard to try and enforce that, find out if it is. And that the other thing is, I seriously would urge the board to move on this. Don't do another work session. Don't put it off for another whatever. The time has come to move forward on this issue and on the ADU issue. I think the longer we put it off, the more disgruntled citizens are going to be. I'm going to be. And it's just another idea. The board does nothing. They don't listen to the citizens. We want something done. So I urge you to move forward both on the ADU issue and the short-term rental issue. Thank you.
Sam Staley, Durban Rio Grande. So thanks again for listening. And I just want to share that I work for you because I work for the Forest Service. I've probably processed at least 100 public comments, because over the past decade, I've processed probably 30,000 public comments. So I get that it's tedious, and then you have to wade through like passion and radicalism and sometimes kind of crazy behavior and words to hear what's reasonable, what's rational, what's in everyone's interest. Put aside my little narrow politics and my thinking and what I would prefer and the people that I like, the ideas they have, the people I don't like, so I can't like their ideas. I have like number one proud thing that I have is having that integrity to take action by listening to everyone fairly and putting aside my preconceived notions of what would be best. And so I appreciate that the town commissioned this study by an expert and spent years, was that fair? A year, at least in creating this, and that 150 people in town participated. Does that more than 10% of town? That's luckily more people are participating than the percentage that are currently short-term rentals. So that's great. So thank you for keeping that in mind and keeping that integrity around your role here serving the public. And then coming back to the fairness, the state didn't pass the tax situation, but I have it in numbers, but Ross Hotel, B&B, local business, right, offering the same service as these short-term rentals, they're taxed at a commercial rate. Airbnbs are taxed as a residential property, right? That's a significant difference. And I know that's not within your authority, but this licensure process and fees for those, that is within your authority. Keep it simple, we'll make it complicated. Just keep it really simple, simple governance, right? Too much governance, none of us want it. Too much bureaucracy, it's too much governance. So I would pitch that 500 feet is far too low. You could run numbers like Ross versus these units and level that out. You could say, well, an Airbnb can earn $500 in a weekend, right? So 52 weekends in a year, you could probably go a little bit higher than that. Cover your bases and maybe put something into the sidewalk fund for the sidewalks. So, thank you. Yeah. So, and the last thing, this is a quilt. This is the percentage cutout that are currently short-term rentals proportionally. This is the fabric of our community, okay? So let's keep this fabric a little more strong before it's fully in rights. Thank you.
Christina Patterson, Price Road. Sorry, I didn't make a quilt. But, so you had a bullet point that said the owner of or their agent must reside or conduct business within 50 miles of the STR. And if you're really trying to prevent out-of-town speculators, I think you should really look at this, revisit that again, because that's an important point. I think, help out the locals with their businesses and provide for them. Thanks.
It's David Murray, 55 Pan American Avenue. I own one rental house in town. I've rented it long-term, I've rented it short-term. The board here recently granted, in the last 6 months, a liquor license to 2 new restaurants in town. And the board approved a change of use for the building down here across from the post office. That's gonna become a cocktail bar. I've seen the menus for the 2 new restaurants. These places to survive are gonna need out-of-town guests to patronize. They're not gonna, and this business is seasonal. We know it's a tourist economy and whatnot. And that's the same thing with the short-term rentals. You can't rent them 52 weekends out of the year because things kind of get quiet in the winter, like a lot of things around here. But these new restaurants, they're gonna provide employment for local people. They already do. Same way with the cocktail lounge. My little short-term rental, because I can short-term it, I can pay for a housekeeper. I got a single mom, that's how she makes her living. She's a local. And I got a couple that takes care of the yard, and they're local. Now I can go back to long-term. It won't make a huge economic difference to me. But the house cleaner will lose her job, and so will the yard guys. And the yard will look terrible. It did before when I long-termed it. I just got terrible comments from locals about how my lawn went to hell. So that's the downside. There's an economic benefit, and the tourist economy needs some short-term rentals. So I would encourage you to be reasonable here and not shut it down, maintain it, because it's an important part of the whole picture here. Because if you don't have a local economy, you get that tax base going. Those guests come, they go to Don's Market because I see the refrigerator when they leave. They go to the restaurants here. If there's no short-term rentals for them and they go somewhere else, they're probably gonna stay somewhere else. They're not gonna be up here visiting. Thank you.
No. I'm gonna have to write a letter because I don't have no time. But I do want to say that I am here to defend the STRs as a right
and a need. And, you know, I get a little concerned. I think last meeting, you said something about overstepping, how did you put it? We have to be careful about overreach from our government. And I appreciated that. And so my concern is, I feel like those of us who are doing the short term are kind of being pushed into doing long term. And I got on the computer to look at the different situations in Paonia. And many of the rentals are rooms and apartments, the Nomad, those particular places will not be included with licensing. I'm not quite sure about that, but the ones that are really going to be hit are those of us who have a house with the short-term rental, because the one-bedroom places will never become a long-term rental. They can't be. They don't have a kitchen. They don't. They can't comply with being a full-time rental. Now, I had some disagreements here about trash. My husband and I were talking. Our property is probably in the best shape it's ever been, even when we lived there, because I am a hospitable person. I want that property to be special for these people who come as visitors. So I do disagree with trash. If there's a problem in that house, we take care of it. We're taking care of those people. And so I get a little bit, and as far as the amount of money, I think David mentioned, you know what? I probably could make more money if I was full-time because it is a partial income and it's seasonal. Usually over Christmas, I'm not making any income, but I love doing what I'm doing. And I think there's a purpose for short-term rentals to encourage and be there for people who come. I came with some of my reviews, but I'm not going to do that because I don't have time.
You have 12 seconds.
Okay. Okay. All right. So basically, $500 to me sounds like a lot when I know what my income is. So, okay, I'm going to send you all over there. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So do we have any people on the Zoom? Okay. Oh, like they're gone entirely. We've lost them.
Just you.
Anybody else? Let's shift up here.
Who would like to go first?
We'll go first.
Go. You go.
Okay, first of all, you know, we're not Ridgeway here. We don't have the amenities close at hand like Ridgeway. I know people might think we're gonna become Ridgeway, but you know, we're not close to Telluride. Ridgeway is a real pass-through area with a lot of like high-end stuff around it. So Paonia is kind of at the end, kind of at a dead end a little bit. So I don't like the fact that we're being compared to Ridgeway. I do think, I didn't have a chance to look at it all, but this person took the time to Xerox this whole thing off from Inglewood. And I guess they were telling me they like this categories, the permit categories. And they were talking about the mom and pop property owners who can supplement their income by renting a bedroom. And they mentioned this in their ordinance. And that kind of struck me. That speaks to a community. So, you know, if you have one bedroom that you can rent where you're sharing your kitchen, maybe sharing a bathroom, you're not going to be making the same amount of money that someone who can rent a house for a weekend with 6 people in it. So how can you charge the same fees? There's some stuff that we really have to look at here. I think this needs a lot of tailoring. I'm glad that we're not talking about passing it right away. Seriously, you can't enforce it. I mean, it's like, why are you doing inspections? I don't think we can just assume that people are just going to be like dishonest around here. That's not fair. Let's start from the aspect of trusting people. And if things don't seem to be working, then you can adjust your ordinances after that. But let's not treat people like they're gonna be criminals. That being said, I do, even though, you know, I have feelings about short-term rentals. Sometimes it seems annoying that a property near me is making all this money and I'm stuck in this big house that supposedly I should be kicked out of because it's too big for me. But what I've seen with long-term rentals around me, I've lived here 24 years. It's wonderful to see places turned into short-term rentals. I've had neighbors that are screaming obscenities with each other. They're parking their vehicles all over the yard, all over the right-of-ways. They've got dogs and cats running in and out from under their porches. They don't take care of their weeds or mow their lawns. It can be really awful around here when you live around a long-term rental. It can become a meth house. You don't see this happening with short-term rentals. I know. It's just that people have an incentive to keep things looking nice, and nice is just kind of trying to be normal. In the bigger sense, it doesn't need to be really fancy. We just had a long-term renter move out, leave a huge bowl of cat food in their yard with a bag next to it, and they left their tomcat and their breeding female behind. Now the neighbors have to take care of this. Long-term rentals, why not let the market take? If long-term renters want to be, maybe the reason people don't want to be long-term renters is because of the people who do rent. And I just don't think people with houses should be condemned to that. So we got another letter from Deborah Spiegel. She
Suzanne, you get one more
gave it
minute.
to me, okay. But this wasn't mentioned. She apparently has a room. But I do think that we should revisit the categories because I thought this was really wonderfully sensitive to the community. They also had a limit on how many days per year. I can't find it in here, but I saw it, that you could rent something short-term to keep it from being a year-round kind of a business.
Okay, someone else's turn. Who else would like to speak? Kathy?
Oh, sorry, can someone else read it? Okay, so I think we're actually really close on this. And I think that we need to do a little bit more tweaking, and then we need to pass the STR one so that the people who have STRs can plan. It's like we have a process in place so that we don't take forever to do this, and then February of next year, or March, and then then all of a sudden we're back to 2026. So I think we're really close on this. What I really like is I've been a little wishy-washy on the number, but I appreciate that you have a 30. And from what I understood, in that 30, that would be one if someone's renting out one room. So I'd like to clarify that is indeed correct. And I think that it's good for them not to have separate, that they are part of the 30. I think one of the areas I think we could look at is tiered pricing for a room versus a house. I would be interested in exploring that. And I want to look at, I know you did an estimate of hours. It seems a little bit low, 15,000 to run this program. So I would want to look and see what does it really cost? But I think we're really dang close, and I really appreciate the cap. The one thing that I had a question on is the option to renew. I think originally we had it so it was a lottery every year for the licenses. And now it seems, and I understand both ways why we would want to give existing SDR people the ability to renew because that's part of the business, et cetera. So I'm still a little bit on the fence if I like the renewal or I like the lottery each year. And if we did the lottery, or if we did the renewal, the one thing that I wanted to know is how we as a town, if we said, whoa, 30 is too many, we want to go to 20, how do we do that if we're renewing those licenses each year? But thank you for all your work on this, because I think we're really close. And I think it really strikes that middle as well. That's all.
Okay, I was going to give Walter an opportunity. Did you want to speak?
Yeah, I think it's very important to regulate the STRs, and we need to do that. But I think trying to include a room rented in somebody's house is like micromanaging somebody's life. I don't think one room should be included. A room in somebody's house should be included in short-term rentals. This is for a separate dwelling unit. And I think we ought to forget the room rental part of this. It'd be impossible to enforce the regulations there. Anyway, are very difficult.
What else?
I mean, I'd like to just tack on to that. So I think the reason why they had that regulation was to try to weed out the cheaters. The problem is those cheaters were not owner occupiers. People that got up here are owner occupiers. I think the cap is fine. Let's prioritize those people, the people who are renting out their room. Let's give 30. There's plenty of people that should be able to partake in the profit dividend that is Airbnb. It should not be limited to the 30 people who are real estate investors who have bought up and taken away inventory from families and households in this community. The quilt that Sam held up was 30 homes. I did the same thing today. I looked at a map of Google Maps and I crossed out 30 homes. And I thought, wow, this is 30 households that could have kids that my daughter could be having play dates at, that the rest of the NISA school could be full, there could be employers. Let's not forget, we keep talking about trying to balance between the real estate investors, whether they're local or outside of town, it doesn't really matter to me, it's the same. The money that they're making is coming at the expense of every renter in town. So the money that all of you are making as short-term rental, if you are taking a single family home off of the market, that is causing rents to go up for all the other families coming here. That's preventing people who could be bringing really good remote jobs and I provide a lot more for the economy here than any short-term rental does. And that is true of many, many people who have brought really good remote jobs here and want to contribute to the community. So it's fine to have a business, but we should prioritize. So we should make a tiered structure where the people who are living in their homes and want to rent out, they get first crack at those 30. It should not go to the people who have bought single family homes and taken those away. And the rest of us have had to pay for that this entire time.
Anyone else? Yep.
Yeah. It's just a really tough issue and yeah, we're all going to have to give some and nobody's going to be happy. But I have a fundamental problem with putting a cap on it and then creating kind of like a perpetual license for people who are doing it now. I'm sorry, I can't go there. I think that maybe you start with people that already have it, but I think it should roll over on some term, a year, 2 years. I don't know what the number is, but it should roll over and it should be on a lottery basis for fundamental fairness. And I think there has to be a differentiation between a one room in an owner occupied house or a small part of an owner occupied house. I think that I too think that should be given priority, whether that's not being under the cap or having some special treatment in the process. I think that's it's a traditional thing in the community at that level. But I think that we're trying to disincentivize taking houses off the housing market. And if that means people have to sell what they're using now, that puts them back into the mix. I think that we should have, the owner should have to live in town. That's one of the things in that Englewood thing is that you have to own the home. And in Englewood, you have to have lived in it for 5 years to be eligible to apply for the short-term rental. And you have to be, even if the responsible person has to be within like 1,000 feet, I think is their limit, and be able to respond within 6 minutes of a complaint. So I think that we have a lot of room to limit it to owners in town. So that's where I'm coming from.
I do agree with that. We did discuss that originally to just limit it to owners in town or in the area. And I believe Boulder actually did go to that in order to de-incentivize the investor issue. So, we might want to revisit
that again, because I think there were some strong opinions on the last trustee board, where they thought too, it should be people living in town or in the area versus having the agent, because you're still gonna get the investor issue there.
John or Rick?
Okay, good. I've got a couple of points. That letter we got, that came with the regulations from England, California, had a lot of good things.
It was California, Colorado. It says, we're looking right at it.
City seal says Englewood, California.
It might be an email that we got today.
Anyhow, one of the things is business licenses for SDRs. I think that's a really good idea. It's a way to register them, and that's a first step, and then permits come later. I also think that it ought to be part of the regulation that the property is owned for 1 year before they apply for a license. That eliminates or at least disincentivizes speculation on houses, which is what we're having. We have a lot of empty places in town because people are buying them up as investments. And then, well, I might make an STR out of it or Airbnb or whatever. So that'll help somewhat. There's also code violations. And I think that a license ought to be held on not having code violations. If you have wild parties in your place, trash gets strewn around, or people are parking on other people's property or on their lawns, that ought to be a violation, and 2 violations, and there either is a suspension or a license hearing. So let's see. I really think locals as owners is the best way to go, because we actually get more responsible owners. The people that are locals are going to take care of their property, and they have a vested interest in this community. And I also think that one of the biggest things is we need to require a review of the property and of having an STR. The neighbors ought to have a say in their neighborhood when there's an STR there. And it ought to be a special review, because it's changing the entire character of that neighborhood right now. And I think that's a must. I also think that we ought to register every rental in town, which at least have a list, because that way we know how many, on our next housing assessment, we can easily get that information. Health and safety regulations can't be shortchanged. I saw what happened at Aspen, the brand new house, and an entire family was killed by carbon monoxide because a plumber failed to glue together the high efficiency plumbing chimney, and people died, an entire family. We need to have those regulations, and I'd also like to have a thing on the door, regulations for the town, so that they don't take their trash out if it's not trash day. You know, and people that come for the weekend, well, I'll just take the trash out. It's going to sit there until Thursday, and it'll end up being a problem. Just little things like that. And quiet time. 10 o'clock is quiet. You know, no party after 11 o'clock. So, and that's about it.
Anyone have a follow-up? We have a few minutes left. If everybody's, Shay, do you want to just do a couple closing remarks?
Sure, yeah, happy to. A couple of clarifications. So like hotels, hospitals, bed and breakfast have different rules. So these short-term rental regulations wouldn't apply. The licensing system, this is not clear before. So it wasn't really clear whether it would be a lottery or not. It just kind of didn't mention it. And I think there was a decent amount of concern from short-term rental owners of like, man, you put all this effort into it and the lottery feels a little unpredictable. So if you get in at first, having it just be renewal. So I think that's all we did, or all I did was clarify that would be a renewal, and then if you get it in by the date required, you would be able to just renew. Also, lotteries are a lot of work for staff to monitor, so another idea of trying to keep it simple and easy for staff to do. Keep in mind that if you guys are interested in going down the road of restricting short-term rentals to locals, there's a lot of legal questions around that. That is what I've found, is that if you want to do that, you have to then create a tiered system, which will say, you know, locals get this pot, but everybody else can also apply for this pot. So to me, it's a little bit more complicated than it's worth if you're setting a cap. So keep that in mind. I get it, because I feel like it really does help with the, you know, focus on locals and let locals make the money off of it. Keep the money here. There's a lot of good reasons to have short-term rentals, which I think that's why the approach is great. We have them. Let's have what we have and stop. That's good. That's enough. So just keep that in mind. And before you go down that road too much, get your town attorney or your new town attorney involved. That is being questioned, I believe, in court now. And there's no ruling on it. And California is obviously going to have different rules than the state of Colorado. You guys don't already have a business license requirement, do you? So if you wanted to do that, you'd also have to get a full process together to do business licenses. But this, in effect, is similar. It's just a license to a specific type of business. And then the code violation requirements are in there now. I kind of breezed over that part, didn't talk about it, but if there's 2 or more code violations, you could get your license revoked if they're not remedied within the appropriate time. And that's a really nice one, because if you have repeat offenders of, you know, trash being thrown everywhere or certain problem properties, that could be revoked, and then they can't be reissued for another year. So it kind of makes a pause happen and would probably make that person consider what to do. So hopefully that answers most of the questions that were kind of thrown out. The next steps, which is the next slide, so staff will kind of take it over from here, consider what was discussed in this workshop tonight. And what staff wanted to do was to bring an ordinance to the Planning Commission. And what that means is that you'd actually just start seeing this in ordinance form. So there'd be all those lovely whereases explaining what we're doing, and then you'd actually just see the changes in the code. And the idea is, we've spent a lot of time and effort on this, and let's get moving. I know change is super uncomfortable. It's really hard to be in your chairs, like really hard. And it is a big job that you guys do, having to make those hard decisions, because you're not going to make everybody happy. And you might, you know, amongst each other, not make each other happy. And that's a bummer, but you know, I think there's been enough input and enough community involvement and discussion on this. I hope you guys feel really clear and like, okay, we want to move forward. I think Kathy, you probably summed it up the best in my mind. Like, we're getting close. I hope you guys feel like you're getting close. There's some tweaks, and you can definitely keep tweaking. Your community, you guys get to decide that. But keep in mind, you can always go back, remove things, change things, add things. So if there's certain things that are feeling like that's too much, take it out. See if it becomes a problem. Like the ADU matching the primary building. If you're, what did you say, mining, what was your character for the?
A lovely mining ramshackle.
Yes, there we go. So like if that's your character and you're not concerned about that generally, maybe you do take that out, or maybe you leave something vague in, because like Suzanne, you said, you know, you have some concerns that maybe it would feel weird. So maybe you find the middle there. It seems overall like you guys are ready to move forward with these, I would say. So staff will bring an ordinance to the Planning Commission. That ordinance process will follow your regular process. So that requires an actual public hearing where you guys take more input from the public and discuss that.
Can I pose a question? Sure. So we're talking about presenting an ordinance, but I think what I heard tonight is the ADUs aren't quite as important as getting the STRs. And what I found confusing is the fact it's really hard when they're both combined together because there's a lot of information and a lot of code to go over because of this. So this ordinance that's being brought forward that we might start chewing on, can we restrict it to just the STRs at this point? It sounded like that was really a priority of getting that under control. Yeah.
I would think the staff could take that under consideration. Yeah, so I kind of agree. It's a
Do we have to
lot,
make a motion to
Yeah.
start with STR? Oh, yeah, this is a work session. Okay.
but you know, everything is being discussed and yeah. Mhm. I mean, the fact we broke it in half tonight, which really seemed to help the discussion, I think was a good indicator.
I think just one kind of caution on that, there are some related items. So Suzanne, I know you brought up a comment of, it feels like maybe certain things are affecting other things and it feels uncomfortable to you. Keep in mind, these items are related. So perhaps I'm just thinking like the short-term rental of ADUs, that needs to go in both the ADU section and the short-term rental section. So there is some overlap and duplication and there's room for error if they're not in the same ordinance and you're not seeing it together. So just be cautious about that as you move forward to make sure that you're really paying attention to like, if you're ready to just pass the short-term rental stuff, that's great. If that's what you're comfortable with and you want to focus on it first, go for it. Just pay close attention because maybe in your ADU ordinance, you need to also adjust a couple short-term rental
So
things.
maybe you can adjust the short-term rental and ADU thing when you do the ADUs, but we can start off with what we've got going now and what we're trying to regulate with that before we expand on it.
Bill?
Quick is good, but good is better. I would like to, and I don't want to hold, but I'm more comfortable if the planning commission could take a shot at some deliberation in a regular planning commission meeting before we go to ordinance. So if it were allowable, I would make that motion now to set up.
With
Can't-
motions,
Can't
so
do a scheduling
no.
motion.
Staff will get these notes.
I do agree, Bill. I think that, I don't know if it's the staff coming together, but the staff just going and just like, here's the ordinance with, there's a lot of open-ended things. It feels like there needs to be some collaboration. Otherwise, we're actually going to be further behind.
If we can't work it out, maybe that's the way we go, but I think we should have a chance at it.
Well, keep in mind what we've been looking at, I mean, it's very close to an ordinance and this is probably more time than you'll get to spend on most of your other decisions. So I'm with you that good is good. What did you say?
There's some
Quick is good.
Quick is good, but good is
But
better.
good is better. You've been doing this. since
And one other
2019.
point, that we have a very poor track record in going back and fixing screwy ordinances. It just doesn't happen in my experience.
I think we could make it better.
Think that we should go with ordinance because it gives us a framework to look at and discuss. It's, as Shay said, it's not set in stone. There are things we can change. If we don't have it in that language, we have to keep going back. It isn't,
It isn't. It's like,
no, we haven't passed an ordinance.
no, but it's proposed in the ordinance.
There's not a ton of difference. So the thing about the ordinance is that you're gonna have to follow your process for an ordinance, which is probably a proper public hearing, and less casual. It can be good because you actually start looking at the ordinance language, meaning there's a bunch of whereas. What is good and bad is that typically, Sam, correct me if I'm wrong, ordinances they won't include like a markup of your whole code. So you don't get to see how this relates to other stuff. You just see where there's additions or subtractions in your code. So it's similar. You still require a public process. I think the idea is, staff has, I'm just going to speak for staff and sorry if it's not appropriate or not aligned. Staff has limited availability and time. And I think they're interested in, we've spent a pretty good amount of time on this. Let's keep moving. And if the ordinance doesn't pass and you guys don't recommend it the first meeting, I think that's okay. No problem. Tweak it and keep moving, but at least it will be kind of a step forward. So I'll share this with staff.
Yeah, and I was just gonna add, in my experience doing rulemaking, it really helps if you have actual words that you're reading. So you're seeing what those words mean and you have something concrete that you're talking both sides with, and it becomes a wordsmithing exercise, which means you may have this ordinance may have to go through several iterations until people understand it and are comfortable with it. But if you just take what we have here and keep talking about it, you don't get concrete moving forward. So, you know, strike and underline is what you work from. And everybody needs to look at it and think, you know, and you think, what does this really mean? And then you can start making concrete language. And so, and I think good is important, but it's not like we have to do it all in one fell swoop. We may take several meetings, as we've done here, and we've gotten such good input. And I know we have completely 180 differences, but we have a lot of good ones too. So it's 7:39, and unless that somebody has a burning desire, I get to go, we adjourn.